In the Australian bush, people sometimes realise they aren't alone long before they know who is there. One night, a bushwalker heard footsteps behind him, matching his pace in the dark. This is Red Dust Archives. Slow, grounded stories from places that don't always feel as empty as they look. Tonight, 3 real personal encounters from Australia. A bushwalker who realised someone had been quietly following him in the dark. A rider in the bush who came face to face with a silent stranger holding a knife. And a moment in the Outback where someone walked past groups of people who behaved as if he didn't exist at all. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what time it is, where you're watching from, and where in the world you are. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. The first story begins in bushland just outside the city, a place people walk every day without thinking twice. It was already getting late. The walking track was almost empty by that point, and the bush had started to grow quiet. The kind of quiet that happens after sunset when most people have already gone home. The walker had stopped beside the trail, sitting near the base of a tree, just taking in the quiet atmosphere of the bush. For a while, everything felt completely normal. The bush was quiet, but not unusually quiet. Just the familiar background sounds of insects and leaves shifting somewhere deeper in the trees. The kind of quiet you expect when the sun has already dropped below the horizon. The walking track was still visible, but the trees on either side had begun to fade into shadow. Sitting there, nothing seemed out of place. No movement, no voices, no sign that anyone else was nearby. But after a while, something shifted. Not in the environment. Nothing obvious changed. It was just a feeling, the kind of feeling that appears suddenly, without explanation. A small instinct, quietly telling you something around you isn't quite right. At first it was easy to dismiss. People imagine things in the dark all the time. Your brain fills in shapes, creates movement where there is none. But the feeling didn't disappear. If anything, it slowly grew stronger. It started as something small, not a sound, not movement, just the quiet sense that something nearby had changed. The walkers stayed where they were, still sitting beside the trail, waiting, listening, trying to work out what the feeling meant. Because sometimes your body notices things before your mind catches up. A shift in the environment, a presence you can't quite see yet, and suddenly, standing up didn't feel like a good idea. Even moving felt like it might draw attention. So they stayed still, completely still, trying not to make noise, trying not to shift position. And that's when it happened. A sound from somewhere behind them. Not wind, not an animal moving through brush. A deliberate sound, like something stepping on a stick. The kind of sound you immediately recognize, even in the dark, because everyone knows that sound. A footstep. And suddenly, the quiet bush around them didn't feel quiet anymore, because somewhere behind them, in the darkness between the trees, someone else was there. And after that sound, the walker didn't move, not even slightly, because once you realize someone else is out there, the next question isn't if they're there, it's where. The forest suddenly felt different. The same trees, the same trail, but now every direction felt possible. Somewhere behind them, something had stepped on that stick. But distance in the bush is deceptive. A sound can travel further than you expect, or closer than you want. So the walker stayed still, listening, trying to pick out another sound, another movement, anything that might reveal where the other person was. But the forest stayed quiet, too quiet, and in that silence, the mind starts doing something dangerous. It starts imagining movement in places where nothing is actually happening. Because when you know someone is there, every shadow suddenly matters. And sitting there beside the trail, with the darkness thick between the trees, the walker realized something unsettling. They had no idea which direction the sound had come from. And just as the walker began to wonder if the sound had been further away than it seemed, there was another movement. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The forest stayed still. No footsteps, no branches shifting, and then another sound. Not sharp, not sudden, but enough that the walker felt their entire body tighten, leaves moving. Somewhere deeper in the bush, not wind, not an animal crashing through the scrub. Something slower, something careful, the kind of movement someone makes when they are trying not to be heard. The walker didn't stay sitting much longer, because at that point, remaining still no longer felt safe. So slowly, carefully, they got to their feet, not wanting to make noise, not wanting to move too fast, because every instinct was now saying the same thing. Leave, but even standing up felt wrong, like movement itself might draw attention. So instead of running, the walker started moving down the trail, trying to stay controlled, trying to stay quiet. And for a few seconds, there was nothing behind them. No movement, no sound, which somehow felt worse. For a few moments, nothing happened. No footsteps, no movement, just the quiet forest, stretching out in every direction. And slowly, the walker started to believe maybe whoever had been there had decided not to follow. Maybe the sound had been further away than it first seemed. But then, behind them, another sound. Not loud, not sudden, just enough to stop them mid-step. The kind of sound that only happens when something puts weight on the ground. And suddenly, the quiet forest felt different again. Because now, it wasn't just the possibility of someone else. Now it felt like someone might actually be following. And in the bush, when someone is following you, you rarely see them. You just hear where they were a moment ago. The walker kept moving, trying not to look back. Because sometimes looking back makes fear feel real. But eventually, curiosity wins. Slowly, they glanced behind them. At first, there was nothing. Just the forest and the shadows between the trees. But then, something shifted. Far back and where the trail met the hill, someone was standing there. Not moving, not calling out, just watching. And in that moment, the walker understood something important. They hadn't imagined the footsteps. There really had been someone there. The walker didn't wait to see if the figure moved. They turned and started walking again. Not running, not yet, but faster than before. Because sometimes the safest thing you can do in the bush is leave quietly without letting the other person know that you ever realized they were there. Because long after the walker left that trail, one question stayed with them. How long had that person been standing there? Encounters like this don't always end with answers. Sometimes the only thing people are left with is the memory of a moment that never made sense. And across Australia, stories like this appear more often than people realise. The next encounter happened in broad daylight. But the person who experienced it still remembers the moment something felt wrong. This happened on a quiet bush trail somewhere in rural Australia. A rider had taken their horse out for a calm afternoon ride. Nothing unusual, just bushland, fresh air, and a peaceful trail. The horse was relaxed, the bush was quiet, and everything felt completely normal. After a while, they stopped for a moment, letting the horse rest while they looked around. The kind of pause people take without thinking. No urgency, no concern, just stillness. And for a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the bush around them. Birds in the distance, wind moving gently through the trees. It felt like any other day out there. But later, they would remember this moment very clearly because it was the last time everything felt normal. And then something shifted. Not in a way that was obvious, not something you could point to right away. Just a feeling that the quiet had changed, the kind of feeling that makes you stop and listen. The rider didn't move at first, just stood there, trying to work out what felt different. And that's when the horse reacted, not suddenly, not violently, but enough. Its head lifted slightly, ears turning, focusing on something deeper in the bush, something the rider hadn't noticed yet. That was the first moment it didn't feel normal anymore, because animals don't react without a reason. And whatever had caught the horse's attention was somewhere out there, hidden, out of sight, watching or moving or waiting. The rider scanned the trees, but the bush gives nothing away easily. Everything looks the same. Every shadow blends into the next. And whatever had changed was still out there, somewhere between the trees. And then, without any warning, he was there. Not walking into view, not approaching from a distance, just standing there, partially hidden between the trees, close enough that he shouldn't have been able to get there unnoticed. The rider hadn't heard footsteps, no branches snapping, no movement through the bush, nothing. One moment, there was nothing there, and the next, there was someone. He was dressed in camo, blending into the bush in a way that made it hard to focus on him properly. And in his hand, he was holding a knife, not a small one, not something you could ignore, a proper hunting blade. And the worst part wasn't the knife. It wasn't the way he appeared. It was the fact that he didn't say anything. No greeting, no explanation, no movement toward them. Just standing there, watching. The rider didn't speak, didn't move. Not right away. Because in moments like that, any sudden movement can make things worse. The man still hadn't said anything, hadn't stepped forward, hadn't even shifted his stance. He was just standing there, holding the knife loosely at his side, like he didn't need to use it, like it was enough that it was visible. The horse shifted beneath the rider, a small movement, but not a calm one, muscles tightening, breathing changing, picking up on something the rider couldn't fully see. That was when the situation changed, because now it wasn't just the rider who felt it. And when an animal starts to react, you don't wait to understand why. You leave. The rider didn't wait any longer, didn't try to figure it out, didn't try to speak, because whatever was happening was already enough. They moved carefully at first, slowly shifting their weight, keeping everything controlled, not wanting to trigger the wrong reaction. The horse responded immediately, not calmly, not the way it had before. There was tension in every movement, energy building just under the surface. And the moment the rider committed, the horse turned, quick, decisive, no hesitation. The kind of movement that comes from instinct, not training. They didn't look back, didn't check if the man had moved, because in a situation like that, you don't need confirmation. You just need distance. They didn't stop right away, not after the first stretch of trail, not even when the bush started to feel open again. The horse kept moving, faster than usual, still tense, still carrying that same energy it had picked up back there, and the rider let it, because slowing down didn't feel like an option yet. Not when the distance still felt uncertain. It wasn't about how far they'd gone, it was about whether it was far enough. And that's the part that stayed with them. Because even after the trail started to feel normal again, something didn't sit right. The kind of feeling that lingers longer than it should, like something had happened that hadn't fully finished yet. It wasn't until later that it started to make sense. Not all at once, not in a clear way, just small details coming back piece by piece. The way he appeared, not from a distance, not approaching, just already there. Close enough that he should have been heard, but wasn't. No footsteps, no movement through the bush, nothing. And that's what stayed with them. Because it meant something simple, something that's hard to ignore once you realize it. He had been there before they stopped, before the horse settled, before any of it felt normal, standing somewhere in the trees, watching and choosing not to be seen. They never saw him again. No sound behind them, no sign that he followed, nothing. And in some ways, that was worse, because it meant one thing. He hadn't needed to move. He hadn't needed to speak. He had already been exactly where he wanted to be, close enough to watch, close enough to step out whenever he chose to. And if the rider had stayed there longer, just a few seconds more, there's no way to know what would have happened next. And sometimes, the part that stays with people isn't what happened. It's what almost did. The next story comes from a completely different place, different setting, different situation, but the same feeling that something wasn't right. This didn't happen in the bush. It happened on a quiet stretch of road. Somewhere far enough out that traffic wasn't constant, not completely isolated, but not busy either. The kind of place where stopping doesn't feel unusual, at least, not at first. The driver had pulled over briefly, nothing urgent, just a short stop before continuing on. And for a moment, everything felt completely normal. After a while, they noticed something. At first, it didn't stand out, just shapes in the distance, people, spread out across the land, not one group, several, far apart from each other, too far to talk to, but close enough that you could see them, sitting, standing, not moving much, just there. And for a moment, it felt like a relief, because seeing people out there meant everything was normal. As they got closer, something started to feel off, not because of where the people were, but because of what they weren't doing. No one looked up. No one turned their head. No one acknowledged that someone was walking past them, not even by accident. The first group, it was easy to ignore. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they hadn't noticed. But then it happened again and again. Each group, the same, still, quiet. focused on nothing in particular and completely unaware that someone was right there. So they moved, just slightly. A shift of weight, the kind of movement anyone would notice. Then a step forward, closing the distance, slowly, carefully. And then they stopped, right in front of them, close enough that there should have been a reaction, a glance, a shift, anything. So they tried again, louder this time, a movement that should have broken the silence, but nothing changed. Not a single person reacted, even standing there, directly in front of them. There was no eye contact. That's when it started to feel wrong. Not uncomfortable, but impossible. Because it wasn't that they were being ignored, it was that they weren't being seen at all. That's when the thought hit. Not all at once, not as a clear idea, just a feeling that didn't belong there. Because it wasn't just that they were being ignored, it was deeper than that. It felt like they didn't exist to them, not avoided, not dismissed, just absent. Like they had stepped into something that wasn't registering them. And the longer they stood there, the harder it became to shake that feeling, because nothing changed, no matter how close they got, no matter how long they stayed. The world around them continued, as if they weren't part of it. Eventually, they moved, not quickly, not suddenly, just stepping away, back the way they came, and even then, they expected something to change, a reaction, a voice, a movement behind them, but nothing came, not even by accident. The group stayed where they were, still, unchanged, as if nothing had happened at all. And that was the part that didn't sit right, because walking away should have helped. It should have made it feel normal again, but it didn't. The distance increased, but the feeling didn't go with it. It didn't make sense right away, not while it was happening, not even when they got back to the car, but later, the details started to settle, one by one. The distance between the groups, the way they were positioned, the fact that none of them reacted, not once, not even accidentally. And that's when it stopped feeling strange and started feeling wrong, because people notice things, even without trying. A sound, a movement, someone walking past. It happens automatically, but this was different. It was like that part of the world just didn't include them. They never spoke to anyone out there. No one approached them. No one followed. Nothing changed. And maybe that's what made it worse. Because it meant those people weren't ignoring them. They weren't choosing not to react. They simply never saw them. And if that's true, then for that moment, they weren't just alone. They weren't even part of the world around them. And maybe there's an explanation for all of them, but in the moment, none of them felt that way, because sometimes it's not about what happened. It's about how it felt. The silence, the stillness, the sense that something wasn't right, even when nothing was moving. And that's the part people remember. Just that feeling that for a moment they were somewhere they didn't fully understand. Across Australia, there are places where things feel normal until they don't. This has been Red Dust Archives. If you enjoy stories like this and you want to hear more, you can like and subscribe. And if you've experienced something like this, you're not the only one. Until next time, stay safe. And if stories like this stay with you, there's another episode here set across some of the most remote parts of Australia, places defined by long distances, quiet roads, and a sense of isolation that feels far removed from everything else. Most of the time, those places are peaceful, but occasionally something happens that leaves a lasting impression. In that episode, 3 encounters unfold across very different environments: a remote camping experience, an isolated rural property, and a quiet bush campsite deep inland. Each one involving moments where something feels slightly off, not dramatic, not violent, but unsettling enough that the people involved still remember them years later. Because sometimes the most disturbing experiences are the ones where nothing obvious happens at all. If you'd like to experience that next, you'll see it on your screen now. Because sometimes the quietest places have the most stories.